Representative Grace Meng dismantled Pam Bondi's position without raising her voice or resorting to dramatic flair. There were no theatrics, no shouting, just carefully chosen words delivered with precision. Yet the impact was undeniable. Inside that hearing room, what unfolded was more than a tense back and forth. It became a clear breakdown of authority. Preparation on one side ran straight into uncertainty on the other, and calls for accountability were met with vague responses and careful sidestepping. From the opening moments, it was obvious this was not a routine oversight hearing. The atmosphere felt heavy and charged, as if something important was about to surface. "Madam Attorney General," Meng began, signaling the seriousness of her line of questioning. She explained that she wanted to address an issue deeply important to many Americans, especially the people she represents: hate crimes. She expressed deep concern over the proposed budget, which would eliminate grant programs designed to help prevent these crimes before they happen. Meng reminded the room that she was the author of one such initiative, the Community-Based Approaches to Advancing Justice program. Established in fiscal year 2022, the program was created to support local organizations working to increase hate crime reporting, provide resources in multiple languages, and strengthen trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. She emphasized that the program was not abstract policy but a direct response to real violence. During the COVID-19 pandemic, hate crimes against Asian Americans surged nationwide. Meng pointed to the tragic March 2021 murders of 6 women of Asian descent in Atlanta, Georgia, as a painful reminder of what unchecked hate can lead to. In the wake of that tragedy, her Hate Crimes Act passed Congress in May 2021 with bipartisan support, including votes from members on both sides of the aisle. That bipartisan backing, she noted, reflected a shared understanding of the seriousness of the problem. For years, Meng said, her constituents have told her how afraid they feel. She has heard the same concerns from community leaders and experts, all reinforcing one conclusion: the most effective way to fight hate is not only through prosecution after the fact, but through prevention. Funding programs that stop violence before it happens is just as important as holding perpetrators accountable afterward. She made clear that justice cannot rely on punishment alone. Meng then revealed that she was holding a letter sent to Attorney General Bondi in May. The letter was written by hate crime survivors and family members who strongly opposed the decision to end these grant programs. Among the signatories were relatives of Emmett Till, James Byrd Jr., Matthew Shepard, and survivors of the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. Meng asked for unanimous consent to enter the letter into the official hearing record. There was no objection. Turning back to Bondi, Meng struck a firm but measured tone. She said she shared support for law enforcement and for fairer prosecution of hate crimes. But she stressed that fighting hate requires action on every front. It means bringing law enforcement, community leaders, and everyday citizens together. These grant programs, she concluded, have helped communities do exactly that, and eliminating them risks leaving vulnerable people without the support they need most. Representative Meng followed up with a direct question, asking plainly why the Justice Department was proposing to eliminate the 3 largest sources of DOJ funding dedicated to hate crime prevention programs. She wasn't posturing or speculating. She wanted a clear explanation. The response, however, immediately revealed uncertainty. Bondi asked for the programs to be listed again and said she had not yet received the letter Meng referenced. She added that she welcomed working together on hate crime issues, whether in the Asian American community or any other community, emphasizing cooperation rather than addressing the substance of the concern. Meng calmly responded that she would gladly work together and clarified that the letter had been sent on May 15. She assured Bondi that her team would make sure it was received. Meng then began naming the affected programs, starting with the Community-Based Approaches to Advancing Justice program. She explained that 3 major programs had been cut and stressed that at least one of them directly supports local law enforcement agencies, including the NYPD, by helping them train for and properly respond to hate crimes. Bondi then shifted to broader numbers. She stated that her office oversees approximately 5,800 grants in total, and so far 365 had been cut, which she described as roughly 6%. She added that 13 of those grants had already been restored after people contacted her directly. Bondi offered to share her personal cell phone number and said she would be willing to sit down and discuss the issue one-on-one to see if adjustments could be made. She repeated that she was not personally familiar with the 3 programs Meng referenced, but said she was open to reviewing any grants from either side of the aisle that lawmakers believe should be reinstated. She emphasized that decisions were being made on a case-by-case basis and reiterated that law enforcement was her top priority. She specifically mentioned hate crimes, violence against women, and violent crime more broadly, pointing to her long career as a prosecutor. Bondi also noted that there were other former prosecutors in the room and said she looked forward to working together to see what could be done. Meng welcomed the idea of collaboration and said her office would flag all the affected programs, especially those that directly support local law enforcement agencies like the NYPD. She then clearly and specifically named the 3 programs at issue: community-based approaches to advancing justice, Jabara Hayer nitrogen monoxide hate, and the Shepherdbird nitrogen monoxide hate program. The clarification landed quietly but firmly. After a brief exchange of thanks, the moment moved on procedurally, but despite assurances of cooperation, what unfolded did not feel routine. This was not intended to be a dramatic exchange, yet it quickly became one. It was the kind of moment viewers replay because of the striking contrast between preparation and uncertainty, between clarity and deflection. From the instant Meng began speaking, she didn't ease into the discussion or offer soft openings. She went straight to the point, leaving little room for delay or distraction. And the imbalance in command of the facts became impossible to ignore. She went straight to the heart of what millions of people across the country had been quietly fearing: the sudden removal of the nation's largest hate crime prevention programs. These were not token grants or optional line items. They formed the foundation of community-based efforts designed to stop violence before it ever occurred. These programs existed because survivors and families demanded more than empty promises. They wanted prevention, accountability, and real protection. And these initiatives were built to deliver exactly that. Meng made it unmistakably clear that these budget cuts were not abstract figures buried in paperwork. They were real decisions with real consequences, choices that would spread fear through communities already on edge. She reminded everyone in the room that hate crimes surged during the pandemic, with Asian American communities hit especially hard. She brought the chamber back to the Atlanta spa shootings, where 6 Asian American women were murdered in a brutal act that shocked the nation. She didn't sensationalize the tragedy. She anchored her argument in it. Those events, she explained, were what forced Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, to act. Those moments of violence led directly to bipartisan legislation and to programs that finally began restoring trust between communities and institutions. Meng's words didn't sound like a politician chasing headlines. They sounded like someone who had sat across from frightened constituents and listened. She spoke as a lawmaker who had heard community leaders explain how broken hate crime reporting systems were. She had helped shape solutions that mattered: multilingual outreach, specialized training for local police departments, and accurate systems for documenting hate crimes. Her argument was built on lived experiences and measurable outcomes, not talking points. Then came the moment that shifted the entire hearing. Meng introduced a letter, and it wasn't just symbolic. It was signed by survivors and families of hate crime victims, whose names are forever tied to some of the most painful chapters in American history. These were people whose lives had been permanently altered by acts of hatred and violence. The letter, sent months earlier, was a direct plea to stop the elimination of these prevention programs. It was a warning, a request, and a cry for action. When Meng asked whether Bondi had read the letter, the answer was a soft but crushing no. The room seemed to pause. If the nation's top justice official had not even reviewed a letter from survivors asking for protection to remain in place, it raised a chilling question about how the decision to cut those programs was made in the first place. The exchange grew more unsettling. As Meng continued, calmly and professionally, Bondi acknowledged that she could not even name the 3 programs that had been eliminated. She asked Meng to list them again. Her responses drifted into vague statements and broad statistics that did not address the question directly. The contrast between the two was impossible to miss. Meng came prepared with facts, dates, survivor voices, bipartisan context, and moral clarity. Bondi offered uncertainty, deflection, unrelated numbers, and an increasingly defensive posture. The imbalance of command in that moment is what made the hearing impossible to forget. At one point, Bondi fell back on a numerical defense, stating that only 6% of DOJ grants had been cut, as if the small percentage somehow reduced the seriousness of what was removed. But percentages don't comfort communities living with fear. Numbers don't rebuild trust, and math alone doesn't explain why the largest and most effective hate crime prevention programs were the ones placed on the chopping block. Calling it routine budget trimming did nothing to address the real impact of eliminating programs designed to protect people from hate-driven violence. Then came a moment that left many viewers stunned. Bondi offered her personal cell phone number, suggesting the issue could be handled through a private conversation, as if a nationwide policy rollback could be resolved off the record, as if years of bipartisan lawmaking, survivor advocacy, and community organizing could be undone or repaired with a single phone call. It didn't come across as openness or cooperation. It felt like deflection, a symbolic gesture offered in place of direct answers. Throughout the exchange, Meng modeled exactly what the public expects from leadership under pressure. She stayed composed and disciplined. She kept the focus where it belonged and treated the issue with the gravity it deserved. She spoke about working together rather than escalating conflict. She acknowledged the importance of law enforcement while still insisting on accountability. Most importantly, she clearly separated prosecution, which no one disputes, from prevention, which is precisely what these programs were built to address. Again and again, she asked for explanations in a respectful, steady, and firm manner. And with each question, Bondi's responses grew less precise. That growing lack of clarity is what made the hearing so striking. The pauses, the generalities, and the avoidance spoke louder than any direct statement. The silence behind the answers suggested something deeper. Either the cuts were not well thought out, the reasoning could not be publicly defended, or there was no desire to explain the decisions openly. For programs created in response to real loss and real violence, programs that had bipartisan backing, that absence of transparency was deeply troubling. These initiatives were never random budget items. They were lifelines. The community-based approaches to advancing justice program helped repair long-standing distrust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. The Jabara-Hair Nitrogen Monoxide Hate Act focused on fixing one of the most persistent failures in hate crime enforcement: inconsistent reporting that leaves victims unseen and unheard. The Shepherd Bird initiatives gave local police the training needed to recognize and respond to hate crimes with understanding instead of guesswork. Eliminating these programs was more than a policy adjustment. It sent a clear message, whether intended or not, that prevention was no longer a priority. And Meng made that message impossible to ignore without ever needing to raise her voice. She didn't need to take down Bondi herself. Bondi weakened her own credibility by failing to explain even the most basic reasoning behind the decision. That's what viewers reacted to most strongly, because this exchange was never just about a policy disagreement. It was a direct clash between someone working to protect vulnerable communities and someone who could not clearly justify why critical protections had been removed. The moment exposed how easily at-risk groups can be pushed aside, how quickly government decisions can drift away from the people they affect most, and how wide the gap can grow between public statements and real policy actions. More than anything, the hearing showed what accountability looks like when it happens in real time. One person kept asking for clarity. The other couldn't provide it. By the end, Meng's words carried the combined weight of bipartisan support, survivor testimony, and public safety concerns. Bondi's answers carried uncertainty, avoidance, and an unmistakable sense of discomfort. The takeaway became impossible to ignore. This wasn't about forms or budgets. It was about people. It was about communities that already live with fear and uncertainty. It was about whether prevention should ever be treated as optional. Meng arrived with facts. Bondi responded with deflection. Meng brought the voices of survivors into the room. Bondi offered a cell phone number. Meng presented solutions rooted in experience and evidence. Bondi showed confusion and hesitation. This was no longer just a tense exchange inside a hearing room. It was a warning if prevention programs can be removed quietly, without clear justification, without transparency, and without full awareness from the officials responsible for them, then no community can truly feel safe. That leaves viewers with important questions to consider. Should hate crime prevention programs ever be cut? Should communities be given the tools to protect themselves before tragedy strikes? And should leaders, at the very least, be prepared to explain decisions that directly affect people's lives? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe these programs should be eliminated, or should prevention always come first? If this breakdown helped you see the deeper story behind the hearing, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so more people understand what really happened inside that chamber. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember this: silence is not peace. It's the moment before someone decides your voice doesn't matter. The fight for accountability doesn't end here.